Welcome to a Thursday, January 4th edition of the DC Daily Drop. I'm Tom.
And I'm Zach.
Big news in the world of DC films today as a new president has been named, and that is Walter Hamada, according to Variety, who had the exclusive on this. So, yeah, we knew this was a new executive was going to be named in charge of DC films, and Hamada is apparently it. Let me guess here, Zach. Probably not a name you're familiar with.
No, in my fantasy film exec league, I did not pick him up. He was on the waiver wire and somebody else got him, and so they're going to get a lot of points now. But no, this is not somebody that I had really heard of before this.
Yeah, and not surprisingly, unless it was somebody related to DC already, it was probably going to be someone we didn't even know. So Hamada has spent the last 10 plus years as a production executive at New Line, and he's specifically worked with New Line's horror films, dating back almost 15 years. And he's been heavily involved with It, and he served as executive producer and production executive on It, The Conjuring, and the Annabelle films. And so he's obviously worked with James Wan and David F. Sandberg before, in particular, two DC Films directors. And he has, according to the Variety article, he has a close relationship with James Wan, and he's been heavily credited for his success with the Conjuring, for working with the Conjuring franchise. Obviously, he's not hardly the only name responsible for that franchise's success, but that's 4 films in and over $1 billion for some low budget horror films. So that's received a lot of praise.
Yeah, this is continuing that trend of Warner Brothers DC going after the horror directors, the people involved in the horror films, which especially like It and Conjuring, like you said, kind of lower budget, but really big box office. So they have a knack, it seems like, for creating a really good return on investment for, amount spent for how much you get back.
Yeah. So does anything jump out at you? It's really tough to judge executives, especially when they're, such high level ones. Anything jump out at you at this hiring other than the horror film aspect?
Just the fact that he's worked with James Wan and David F. Sandberg, and if we believe it, he has a close relationship with James Wan. The more and more I think about it, if Wan does a really, really great job on Aquaman and they really, really like it, he could become that kind of new director that they give the bigger like group projects to. Maybe like Justice League 2, give it to Wan and let him direct it. If they're continuing down this road of kind of surrounding him with people that he's worked with before, we got this, the new president is somebody who has a close relationship with him. So if they like what they see from him, maybe he gets a bigger project before an Aquaman 2 potentially.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he's worked with Wan and Sandberg and some other information we'll get to later, I think this sounds like it should be a relatively smooth transition for DC Films because he's familiar with that. He's worked with DC before, which we'll touch on later. So it sounds like it should be relatively smooth, all things considering, when you put a new executive in charge. To me, this sounds like kind of like he's taking on, it gives DC a president of the film. So someone to blame or to give credit to for success, somebody to make final decisions. I don't know what his creative involvement is, and it sounds like Geoff Johns is going to be still heavily involved, and I'm glad for that. I don't know if Hamada has any creative talent whatsoever. To me, it sounds like he's at least overtaking the John Berg role in terms of business side, which we assume Berg was heavily involved with business side wise, and maybe a little bit more. Hamada will have creative control, but he's certainly very proven from a business perspective. The Conjuring franchise, like we said, and New Line's horror films have been great, able to make films on budget, on time, that have a tremendous return on profit and are also well received by fans. So I think it's a promising hire, for considering it's a name 2 hours ago I'd never heard of.
Yeah, and it's also it's also nice that we've been talking about this merger on and off again, and it's we're not even getting the court date until March, and it's nice that they've gone ahead and basically just waited for the new year to name the president, but they're still just going ahead with that, not really waiting for the merger to go through or not go through.
Right. And so WB president Toby Emmerich also comes from New Line, and so he is familiar with Walter Hamada, which means he could, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, but at least it also means that, again, they're familiar and sounds like a relatively smooth transition.
Yeah, and he actually said about Walter Hamada that Walter is creative, resourceful, and committed to excellence, and will bring those qualities to his oversight of our superhero films. Also from the article, he will be leaving New Line to work for Warner Brothers, and will also oversee the other types of comic book movies that the studio produces outside of the DC canon.
That was interesting that they mentioned that. They specifically mentioned that there. I don't think, at first I'm like, what does that even mean? And like, does that mean they're going to, they might have rights to some other superhero films or anything like that, comic book movies or something like that. But I'm pretty sure it just means the Vertigo film adaptations, which are mostly at, like The Kitchen, which is at New Line. I think I think this means he'll oversee that, as well as any potential Elseworlds, whatever it is, type banner, out of continuity films. I think that just means anything related to DC or comic books, Hamada is going to be in charge of.
Yeah, the Elseworld thing that you brought up, that's immediately what I thought of when I saw that potential Joker film that we've heard of, and maybe the other films that would happen along those lines. That's what outside of DC canon conjured up in my mind.
Yeah, and so it sounds like Geoff Johns will remain heavily involved. He's going to stay DC President and Chief Content Officer, which he has been all along, still be involved with TV shows and comic books and any other adaptations or things like that. And the article says he will, quote, work closely with Hamada on the films. Yeah,
and we both wanted maybe Geoff Johns to be named the president of DC Films, or to get some new role or something, but he still is, like you said, president and chief content officer, so he's definitely going to be heavily involved. So I'm hoping that he has the time and the ability to work really closely on all of the films and the story of all the films, and kind of get the final say in what goes in or what doesn't go in. So I'm hoping that expands if nothing else.
Right. I should clarify, he's DC Entertainment president. Obviously, Hamada will be the new DC Films president. But I kind of, like you said, I hope he has heavily involved with the creative process, and Hamada can sort of oversee things and handle the business. We kind of hoped with the Berg and Johns relationship, Berg was handling business and Johns was handling the creative side. I still kind of hope that's what it is. But my guess is Hamada probably will. I mean, he's the president; he's going to have final creative say. But I hope he leans heavily on Geoff Johns for his experience with these characters.
Yeah. So Toby Emmerich went on and said, I'm confident Walter and Geoff, working with our filmmaking partners, will deliver films that will resonate with both broad global audiences as well as DC fanboys and fangirls. And that's a nice quote. It kind of sounds like a little bit of corporate mumbo jumbo resonating with a broad global audience, but it basically just says Walter and Geoff can, right. They will create a synergy that will create good films. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, just the fluff piece, but it shows when he mentions them together, it sounds like it's going to be heavily involved. But like I said, I'm sure Hamada will have final say, and I mean, he's the president. And I think naming, one thing we should mention, naming a DC Films president, publicly, they're publicly acknowledging it. Emmerich has some quotes there. I think this shows he will, he's going to have the control, for better or worse. We don't know if that's good or bad. And I think when Johns and Berg were named in charge of DC Films, I never got the impression that they had final creative control. It was still Warner Brothers was overseeing them, and they had input, but it was up to Warner Brothers. It sounds like DC Films is going to be more than its own thing. That's what I'm taking out of it by having a president in charge, putting it out there publicly. It seems like they're going to let this division of DC Films, be its own thing. I mean, it'll be involved heavily with Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers will still oversee it, but I'm hoping it'll sort of be its own thing.
Yeah, it does, like you said, it clears up some of that confusion that we have had in the past of like, well, who really is, at the end of the day, who's in charge, who gets to say what's in and what's not. So, and Geoff Johns welcomed him on Twitter. He said, welcome aboard, Walter. Thrilled to be working with you. It's been a blast on Shazam. Now it's off to the rest of the DCU and get a Twitter account, I guess. Walter Hamada does not have a Twitter account.
Yeah. So, this, I didn't even think of this when this news hit, but Hamada has obviously been over at New Line. Shazam is at New Line, which is just a division of Warner Brothers. So it's apparently they've already worked together.
Yeah.
And then the Hollywood Reporter article mentioned that Toby Emmerich was impressed with Hamada's work on Shazam at New Line. So it's like we said with the smooth transition, it seems they've already worked together Hamada with Johns and Hamada with Emmerich and DC characters in the past. And so I don't know how involved he was, but somewhat. And so I think that's an encouraging sign that he's already sort of had a toe in the universe, and now he's going to be heavily involved with it.
Yeah, definitely kind of just expanding the role if he is involved in, or he's involved in Shazam and working with that. So now he's gets to keep doing that, but doing it on a bigger scale with the rest of the films as well.
Yeah. So my hope is he doesn't, just come in and say, okay, let's throw everything out that's been in development. I've got my own ideas. I think we need a $250 million Booster Gold movie or something like that.
I wouldn't mind that, but yeah, I get what you're driving at.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the smartest decision. Like,
no,
okay,
let's not financially, but
let's. Okay, well, that's kind of important. So I'm hoping he's I'm hoping he's a good choice, and that's really all we can do right now. Is hope for the best, because he might be a great executive. He might not at all. And we just don't know because we know so little about what executives really do behind the scenes. And so, he seems to have a promising resume, and I'm hopeful for what will come.
Yeah. Again, not somebody that I was really keenly aware of, but like you said, it seems like it's a really good choice and not really shaking things up. Seems like a good setup for a smooth transition, like you said. So I am hopeful as well.
And I think if you like the general direction that DC films have been going towards with what we've seen from Wonder Woman and what we're expecting from Aquaman and Shazam, I think this seems like we're going to stay on that course. As opposed to bringing in an outside hire, bringing in someone from Fox or Sony or Disney or something like that, who has never worked with any of these people before and wants to take over from scratch. I think this sort of, it seems like not as sharp of a change as we might have feared when the news came out that John Berg was leaving. It doesn't seem as severe. And I think that's a good thing, because I really believe in Aquaman and Shazam and the future and the creative people that are involved.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, that's a lot to unpack, but a big day for DC Films. So we will be back again tomorrow.